Everybody, breaking news today. Rent numbers are out, and the news is saying that rents are softening across the country. Asking rents are coming down. They're actually down to a 3-year low. Let's check this out.
We did get some interesting rent metrics today for November. Asking rents, which are down pretty big, biggest in 3 years, although there was a caveat that in some areas of the country, like the Midwest, where people are moving to.
So let me cut to the actual article. So Redfin released their data today, and it says the tide turns for renters as asking rents post the biggest decline in over 3 years. The median U.S. asking rent fell 2% year over year in November. I'm going to pull this down so you actually can see. You can see the bottom here. This is actually representative that landlords are having to lower their price. They're asking for less than they've been. So you can see that there was a historic run up in the amount of asking rent. I'll show you another chart, by the way, just to give you another idea. Look at this. This is Tampa. So giving you some context for Florida, it's no surprise. You can see that Tampa is running here at the midway point of the pandemic. This is 2020. If you see where my cursor is, just above $1,600 a month for asking rents, you can see that those numbers went off the charts. And where they are today, it's at $2,138 according to Zillow in Tampa, which is a climb of 34%. But folks, one thing you need to understand is that the actual cost to own in Tampa at the same time has climbed 92%. So one of the things that we have to realize as we go back, and I want to finish the story because there's more for you to know about rent, is that there's an underscore or an understory or a story underneath all of the rent issues in housing market. Because one thing you need to understand is that historically, and should say the normal life of our market, is that rents run higher than cost of housing. And when those two invert, your marketplace is essentially broken, which is some of the issues we see now. The real question becomes, if asking rents are falling, rents start to trend, because that's a leading indicator saying that landlords are going to be making less. And I'm going to break it down for you depending on which part of the country you're watching this so you can understand how are rents dropping in my area. Is the South doing as good as the Northwest and all this kind of thing? But you got to understand is that the inversion, being the enormous cost of buying a home versus renting is going to shake itself out, meaning that we're going to have cost to own eventually fall below cost to rent. But at the same time, rent's trailing down. And ultimately, folks, listen to this. I'm going to tell you why rents are trailing down, multiple reasons, but I'm also going to tell you what this might mean for your house price in 2024. But let's carry on this particular lead story, which says the rental market has lost momentum over the last year and a half, in large part because there are more apartments on the market and the resulting boom in recent years. That's only half the story, folks. This is the reason why you're seeing rents fall. This right here is a chart going back to March of last year to the end, which is most recent. This was a week ago, November 29th. Folks, look at this. This is credit card borrowing, okay? So when you see this going vertical, okay, it's not changed. But here's what it costs to borrow on those credit cards. So you gotta understand, all these people that are trying to get by, look what happened over this same period of time. From here to here, credit card costs. That is the expense by which people are now using their credit cards to get by, because look what happened. This right here is the average rate for credit card borrowers. It went from 15%, where it had been for quite a while, and when the Fed started raising rates last year, it went vertical. It went straight up, which is supposed to curb borrowing costs. It's supposed to slow this down. But what's happening is not only are people not slowing down on their spending, they're being incentivized to stop spending. This can only mean that the populace is broke. They're literally broke. They can't afford to pay more. And you got to understand, living cost, rent, isn't optional. When people by and large cannot afford to get into a purchase, which you can go into any comment of any video on housing market and see a list of people, the average Joe working 40 hours somewhere saying, unless you're rich, you can't afford a house. But I digress. Look at this. So it says renters are finally catching a break. Better deals are easier to come by because landlords are doling out concessions. They have to, folks, because vacancy is rising. So you go further down here, you can see that this is a big boom of apartments. So apartment starts are climbing into last year, towards the end of last year, they kind of soften, but the units completed also trailing with it, but they're higher. They're much, much higher than this. Look over the years prior. So you have a ton more units coming out. I just heard an update yesterday from multifamily pros online saying, hey, look, there's going to be many more units coming next year. And then 2025, even more. So for the next 2 years, you're going to have way more multifamily apartment buildings still coming to the market. And as you can see, a massive number entered the market now, which is part and parcel to why you're hearing the asking price of rents coming down, because those things are softening. Now look at this. Where are the rents high, where they've fallen, okay? So you can see the West up here trending down. You can see the West and ultimately the Northeast being at the top of the range, and you can see the South, and most of them all, South looks like it climbed and is starting to trend down over the last 3 or 4 months. And then the Midwest is still climbing. So Northeast and West markets fell the most. And the South is starting to see a slowing trend as well. And then folks in the Midwest are still seeing very expensive increases in rent. And the reason why is because people can, there's still some element of affordability. So there's this idea of arbitrage going on where people are getting out of expensive areas like the Northeast. They're leaving the West. They're going to the Midwest, which is now the last bastion of affordability in the entire country, which is driving their cost higher. And folks, listen, just like in 2008, anything that was like last choice for people, when it was any time before we actually saw the last real market recession take effect, there was the major way you knew it was coming is the last bits of affordability ran hot, okay? And we're seeing that in the rental market, and we're seeing it in the homes for sale too. I'm gonna get to that in a second. But the reason why the Midwest is not winding down and seeing a softening yet is because we're at the last leg, probably in all likelihood, we're in the last leg, last gasp before things get sketchy. And here's a further example. So when we had the most recent Case-Shiller index come out, if you'll remember, Case-Shiller just released numbers, and the leader on the Case-Shiller index was Detroit, was Michigan, okay? Now, why is Michigan leading the most recent total index of the top metros across the country when the rest of them, many of them were going softening, taking a breath? Why is that one running hot? Well, you got to remember, what was the top market to crash? But if you take a look at all math of all cities across the entire country between 2007 and 12, which market lost the most? I mean, they were like 60% plus value lost. Top of the charts. It wouldn't be California, it wouldn't be Las Vegas, and it wouldn't be in Florida. Michigan. It was Detroit. That marketplace is already seeing its shift. It's already seeing it's still plowing ahead. It's still growing in price because the values are reachable. And the same thing here. Whenever you start to see these lower appeal places, like nobody picks, no offense to the Midwest, nobody picks the Midwest. People go to the Midwest because that's where they need to go, because that's what they can afford, okay? Not a knock against the Midwest. I'm saying it's a knock against the economy that's driving people. Same thing with the lesser, less appealing areas. The ones that people are like, I got to move here. I'm going to end up here because that's what I can afford. Take a look. Coming back to Florida, this is more of an explanation of why the home price or the actual active inventory. Look at the active listings in Florida going back to August. It's going vertical. We had 80,000 homes in August, folks. We are now at 110,000, which means every month that number is going up 10% or so. Look at, think about this last time. So we had this big climb last fall. You can see it right here, right? How about right now, between August and November, look at the difference between what we saw last year. August to November was maybe, 20% less in inventory growth than what we see now. It's just gone way up in the past few months. Just to give you an example, look, November, okay? This is, by the way, Federal Reserve data. November active listings is pushing 110,000. We were just at 99,000 a month ago. It jumped a full 10, 11% in a single month, which just shows you absorption is starting to slow down. There's starting to be a little bit more inventory picking up, and it's just not selling off. And folks, listen, look at this. Look at this. This is the scary thing about the rental data, okay? You got to understand, look, this right here is not normal. It doesn't remain this way. This was pushed because of economic policy. This red line, and just to say, Jared, what the heck are you talking about? I see the line crossed, but what's the point? This red line is housing cost in Tampa to actually own a home. This is the rental cost. So right before we went, parabolic over the past 2 years, it was what was it here? 1,600, something like that, $1,600 a month. Let's call it 16, because right here, see that the base, 16. Let's call that the base before things just blew up. But 1,600 a month, it's like 1,300 a month to own. Okay, you say, well, Jared, how did you get to those ownership numbers? Well, this right here shows the most recent numbers. It shows almost a 7% interest rate, because that's what it was at the end of this chart, with a 13% down payment, considering 0.75. I don't know if you can actually see the bottom of the chart. Let me pull it up. There you go. You see the bottom right here? Right here. See, it says cost factored for Tampa at 0.75 value annually. Okay, what that means is if you have a $400,000 house in Tampa, 0.75 is how this graph is saying your payment's $2,500 a month. It's considering 0.75 for taxes and insurance, which is absolutely not true for Florida. In Florida, the tax and insurance is more like 3%. It's not 0.75. So the other thing you got to consider is the gap here where you see average rent is $2,100 and the average sale, like if you're going to buy versus rent, you got to understand $2,500 a month isn't accurate. It's more like $3,000 a month, because this is a national data graph that I pull from. Like I could literally pull any metro area in the country to show on this chart. The reason why I'm using it is because I trust the data point, but this is factored for every city in the country, okay? In Florida, it's not 0.75. So we got to understand that the ownership cost in Florida is way, way up here. What I'm saying, folks, listen. For the market to come back into symbiosis, this ownership is going to fall. And in Tampa, the historic distance between what it costs to rent, it's supposedly around 18% less to own at any given time in history. So right now you've got it like way, way over. You got $3,000 a month. $3,000 a month, give or take, is what it costs to own versus $2,100. And now rent is what do we just find out about rent? What's the future of rent? Softening. It's coming down. So rents are coming down. That means that in time, the actual correction will bring this ownership where it's back in more in line with its history. If that correction comes, then one of two things has to happen to bring this back down. Is either you're going to hold home prices flat, at where they are. Average price in Tampa is going to be where it is, and then suddenly all of a sudden your interest rates could come back down to 2% again, okay? Which isn't going to happen. Like there's probably zero chance. You ask any economist in the country, will we have 2% interest rates in our lifetime? Most of them, 99% will say never. It's not going to happen. So ultimately, the only lever left is asking price. Would asking price change? Is it going to change? As the marketplace shakes out, rents are coming down. How do we sustain this inversion? This is inverted. This is the way. By the way, I could show you Orlando. I could show you every market in the country. And I'm going to tell you this, folks. There's no, you got to understand that when reckoning comes, these things are going to balance themselves back out. And this becomes part of the dilemma with the Fed, right? The Fed, it knows that so many areas of our marketplace is still upside down. So while everybody in their world is like fixated on how the central bank needs to gas the fire again and bring it all back up to speed and, drop interest rates and fire those housing. Let's see housing prices go up 10% more next year. Well, how do you do that when it's literally an upside down world right now? Like this is more of the, when you have this inverted, like this is why you have all the stories of people saying, I'm out, I can't get in. I mean, what are you going to do? Build apartments for everybody and then just limit housing stock? I mean, we're still building houses too. So you got to understand there's going to be reckoning. And that's how I don't see a world where in some of these marketplaces you don't see a shift in housing prices by 15, 20, maybe in some cases close to 30%. And ultimately, you keep doing this with the inventory stock, resale inventory keeps climbing, you're going to see some changes. And ultimately in Florida, we're going to see houses, ultimately carrying costs. They're not dropping anytime soon, folks, and they are going to get more expensive next year.